Over the past couple of months, I haven't been reading as diligently as I would like, and uh, a lot of that is due to things I can control. I haven't been taking as many notes as I read, and I haven't been reflecting so much. But uh, a lot of it also has to do with life circumstances and things that have been going on. So um, I wanted to make a video for the rhythm of it and getting back into the rhythm of making these videos, because I do enjoy it. So I'm going to talk a little briefly, maybe more briefly than I would like, about some of the best books I've read in May and June. At the beginning of May, I read Faust. I have this collected edition with parts 1 and 2, translated by Martin Greenberg, and this is from Yale University Press. Faust is one of these capital G, capital B great books, and with stuff like that, I always find myself really struggling to choose an edition and find a translator, especially find something that has the notes I need and feels comfortable in my hands, and the font isn't too small or whatever. And I found this one, gosh, I can't remember where, but it's exactly what I want. It lays everything out in poetic style, and the font's pretty big. There's no German text in here. The introduction is adequate, but it's not super thorough. It's only like 15 pages or so, and the notes are minimal as well. But I really liked this edition of Faust. The Faust story is obviously very famous, with Goethe's main twist being the sort of wager between Faust and Mephistopheles, the continuing to strive until Faust says, like, "Abide, moment, thou art so fair," or something like that. Until he has found himself satisfied in this life, he will keep going. And the wager between Faust and Mephistopheles is sort of doubled by the wager between Satan and God. All of the first part is really, Faust, I was really worried that Faust was going to be so difficult, because that's a lot of what people say about it. And there's this big split between part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is certainly easier to follow. It's a bit more of a tragic story, with clear beats and clear story beats and progress. And part 2 is like a total, it's really chaotic, and there is a plot and there are things that happen, but it's depicted so it's so circumspect, and it's done through like almost a relitigation of the entire classical tradition. And this big, this book ultimately is kind of a huge conflict between classicism and romanticism, and how they're ultimately, maybe irreconcilable with each other. I got this copy where they have Faust 1 and 2 together, because I really thought that they were, because it's part 1 and 2, I thought having them together would make the most sense for me. But there's a really clear split, and a lot of people might only prefer part 1, and a lot of people might only prefer part 2. I'm of the camp that I think part 2 is the better part. It's this incredibly high literary achievement, like one of these great pieces of art that transcends anything, almost anything. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I think Faust is one of the best books I have ever read, and I would like to talk more about it, but as I said, I don't really have my thoughts in order, or my notes or anything. You can see I left the book blank as I was reading it, but such is the way of things, that perhaps a second reading will be equally enlightening and equally thrilling. I read After the Banquet by Yukio Mishima. Mishima is a Japanese writer who I have like a pretty good relationship with. I have a pretty good feel for his stuff and what he likes to write about. This really like decadent style, that he really thrives in. And I really like these old, what are they? Perigee, these old Perigee books with these, ink paintings on the cover. I really like these editions. And so I had After the Banquet on my shelf for a long time. I had wanted to read another Mishima book, so I chose this one, and it's immediately different from any of his other books because the main character is an older woman, which I think is unique. I mean, maybe some of his stories have older women, and maybe some of his other novels that I haven't read, but certainly for me, this is the first novel of his I've read that centers around an older woman. I was sort of pleased to read this one following Faust because, Faust is so much about striving and continuing and going on. And there's a lot of that happening in After the Banquet too. But this isn't any sort of religious wager or anything. It's a woman sort of staking her reputation and the life she has created for herself. She's staking this against the potential for some sort of true romantic partnership, this sort of idyllic love matching. She's a owner of a restaurant, kind of like adjacent to like a geisha establishment, but it's really just a place where sort of the elites of the city could come and schmooze and be served. And she's had this really successful career doing it, and she falls in love with a patron, and this patron embarks on like a political career, and the relationship between them becomes increasingly fraught as the woman, whose name is Kazu, becomes increasingly involved in the political campaign, so much that she is sort of foregoing everything that all of her sort of everything that she believed in that led her to her original success. She's sort of gradually letting the balance shift into this progress of pursuing this political career for her husband. The writing here is great, of course. I mean, Mishima's a great writer, and this is translated by the one and only Donald Keene, goated Japanese translator and cultural historian. So there's really, really great stuff in here. The style is sort of like pitch perfect. But some of the plotting, I thought it got a little bit slow. This is a pretty long book too for, it's close to 300 pages, and I think maybe 35 or 40 of them could have been taken out or could have been reduced a little bit. But the length of it and how it's continually, it's prolonged, it does add to this sort of drama and this really intense feeling of dread, as you can sort of, you can't help but foresee what's going to happen to Kazu as the story continues. I read Spring Tides by Jacques Poulin, who, if you've watched any of my videos, you might know that Poulin's one of my favorite writers, and I love all of these books of his from Archipelago that are translated by Sheila Fishman. This is the earliest one of his books to be translated that I've read, and you can definitely tell that this book is more of a creation of a younger writer. It takes place on an island in the river. What's the river in Quebec? I forget the name of the river, but there's an island in this river, and there's this sort of rich patron who sends our main character to the island because he believes that the island will be this sort of paradise for him. It will give him happiness. The patron is interested in bringing happiness to this man, to the translator. He goes by Teddy Bear. He's a comic translator, and this is another theme that Poulin likes to write about. He likes to write about literary men who translate, men who create work or are involved with books. But on this island, he's sort of caretaking this small island and walking back and forth between two houses, and the changing of the seasons and watching the tide of the river and stuff. But the patron believes that other people will be happy on the island too. And so he starts introducing more people. And at first it's just a woman, a young woman who he lives with on the island for some time. And they have this really sort of like beautiful, like post-60s hippie, like spiritual connection with each other. Everything's very free and open. And as more people start to come onto the island, it becomes this sort of communal thing, like a real sort of hippie commune type stuff. Various intellectuals and people with different psychological hang-ups that are living together. As the island becomes more populated, the relationship, the main romantic relationship sort of begins to disintegrate, and the sort of happiness that had been sought in this place becomes increasingly out of reach. And the book ends with the narrator, the translator, Teddy Bear. He has to like physically remove himself from the island. He has to like swim against the current, and this really wonderful scene at the end. Poulin's books are really fun for me. They're really fun and easy to read. I really like them, but definitely the attitude here is more of a young man. And so I think just compared to the other ones, they had this sort of older, I guess Poulin was older when he wrote them, so the vibe was a little bit different. There's a little more bitterness in here. Especially concerning the work, the translation work that Teddy Bear does. So that was a little different flavor, and so I'm curious to see if I can find more of Poulin's books, if I can sort of track any sort of change in philosophy as he aged and as he was writing. I read Suttree by Cormac McCarthy. I've been working my way through McCarthy's books chronologically. In the past, like in college and when I was younger, I'd read Blood Meridian and I'd read No Country for Old Men, but I really like latched onto this idea of reading McCarthy's works from the beginning and working my way through them again. And so I've been putting off Suttree because it's so long, and in this copy, these vintage internationals are really great. I really like the style of them, but the font in this one is really small. But I finally got to it, and I was very pleased. This is one of these books that's so dense with allusions and so rich on every page that one read is never going to be enough. Two reads won't be enough. You could probably read this book 10 or 15 times and you'll still be picking up on new connections and new metaphors, and the characterization is so rich that it's all connected on a word by word, passage by passage level. In a really like intricate and beautiful way. And it's very clear that this is the case if you just read, at the beginning of the book, there's this italicized page and a half of just some of the most bizarre images and surreal language that you can imagine. And that really sets the tone. It sets the tone really well. I was moved. It's very strange and as I said, surreal. The main character, Suttree, Cornelius, but he goes by Buddy. Everyone calls him Buddy. He's living in Tennessee, and he's sort of eschewed his familial ties that would give him some sort of economic advantage. He comes from a bit of a nice family, but he is instead like living on a houseboat on the river and surviving by fishing. And he's sort of in and out of prison, and the book's about his relationships with the people in Nashville, these very poor, dejected people. And the big thing, or I don't know if it's the big thing, but a big thing about McCarthy's books is that many of them involve journeys and motion, and things start at the beginning of the book and the characters physically move to another place. And Suttree differs in this. Suttree is about the events in the town that lead up to Suttree, the man, choosing to embark on a journey, and we never get to see what happens. All of the shenanigans and petty crime and tragedy, and it all becomes a part of what we imagine to be an eventual book. You know, we're sort of led to believe that Suttree will end up becoming a writer. As soon as he's able to leave, he's going to be able to write, and everything in the book ends up becoming like inspiration for whatever he will go on to create. Another word that really comes to mind in Suttree is peregrination. There's a lot of meandering and moving here and there and back and forth, and we sort of revisit the same places dozens of times, and you know, characters meet and they part and they come back together again. And so all of this motion, you know, like this cloud on the cover, it creates kind of like a storm or a tempest. Something is brewing in this town, and of course, you know, all of the poverty, and it's not explicitly. He doesn't explicitly deal with World War II, but it takes place in 1950, so you can sort of imagine that the post-war piece of this book is sort of leading to a lot of the poverty and the destitution that takes place here. And so this images of motion and moving around and a storm, and it's quite powerful. And I really loved Suttree, and I'd like to read it again. I mean, I think, you know, there's no way I couldn't read it again and not find a million new things to love about it. But it is quite dense, it is quite long. It's also very, very funny, with the infamous episode with the watermelons. You know, I think it's a great book, and a lot of people think it's McCarthy's best. I think I would like to reread Blood Meridian before I give my opinion on what I feel about that. But that's Suttree. I read The Red and the Black by Stendhal, and I can't remember why I was particularly interested in this book. Someone talked about it, or some writer mentioned it in a book, and it just like stuck in my mind that this was like a classic book that you know, is going to match sort of my sensibilities as a reader. And for a lot of it, it totally did. And now as I'm speaking, certainly Stendhal is brought up a lot as a influence or a predecessor to Proust. And certainly in the second part of this book, you get a lot of, there are a lot of similarities between this book and Proust's books. The main character here is a young man named Julian Sorel. And he's really, you know, in a sort of classic conflict. He's sort of a self-professed hypocrite, and he is most interested in succeeding and improving his station in the world by whatever means are accessible to him and whatever suits the times. And so the sort of representations of this battle for him are between becoming a soldier or becoming a clergyman. And he reflects how if he had been born 20 years earlier, he would have been able to be a soldier in Napoleon's army, and this would have been his path to success. But nowadays, maybe joining the clergy and becoming a priest is more in fashion. And so this is the constant conflict of the book, the main conflict between the red and the black, the army and the clergy. There's a really wonderful image at the beginning of this book where Julian is like in a tree, or he's in a tree near a river, and he's reading a book about the life of Napoleon. And his father has sort of just sold him off to become a tutor to like a rich family in the town. And as his father is coming to greet him, he sort of accosts him physically, and the book about Napoleon is flung into the river and flushed downstream and lost forever. And so it's very, very clear from the onset that this book is about what France is like in the immediate loss and departure of Napoleon. The society is sort of unsure of itself in many ways. Of course, the sort of main plot point driving everything forward, besides these sort of intellectual struggles within Julian, are the romances. He sort of falls in love with the woman whose children he is meant to tutor, and you know, the class dynamics and social situation makes it, you know, very fraught and challenging, and they come together and they break apart, and it's very tragic and very dramatic. That sort of creates the main dramatic episode of the book, and that plays out throughout the rest of the book. But there are wonderful scenes where Julian enters the college, or like the school, to become a priest, and eventually he's sent to, in the second part of the book, he's sent to become kind of like what is he? He like represents like some sort of baron, or I can't remember exactly what, but he's like a representative of this very noble house, and he's sent on various missions of diplomacy to England and other places, and so he has to sort of learn how to overcome his childhood and the sort of mannerisms of the poor that he sort of grew up with. And so all these scenes in the upper class, they take place in these parlor rooms and these balls, and this is like super clearly an influence on Proust. There are some sections in here that are beautiful and very funny and very nice, and they are echoed in Proust later on. So that was wonderful to read. The ending of this book is super melodramatic, and it stretches out quite a long ways. So again, I found myself at the end of the book feeling a little bit tired, but I think it was great, and I think Stendhal's a really interesting figure, and I think he has a book called On Love. I'd like to read Stendhal's book on love, and I was happy to finally get to this one after, a few years. Lastly, I have Reflections by Walter Benjamin, which is a companion volume to Illuminations, which I read last year. Illuminations contains a lot more of Benjamin's like hard criticism and theoretical writing, his stuff on Kafka and the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction and all that stuff. Is very heavy duty. And this one, as the cover says, is more essays, aphorisms, and autobiographical writings. And here again, I can't help but think of Proust. The first piece here, the Berlin Chronicle, is Benjamin's attempt at sort of a recollection of childhood and autobiographical piece depicting the entire like milieu of his childhood growing up in Berlin. And One Way Street is also one of my favorite pieces of his. It's a bit of cultural criticism that's very scattershot, and he's sort of creating a larger idea about culture from these various small pieces titled Breakfast Room, Gloves, Chinese Curios, these little bits of society that come together, flag at half-mast. It's really, really great. The second part here has a lot of his travel writing. He went all over, but he wrote a very long piece about Moscow. There's some great stuff about Marseille and Paris as well. And then there's a really wonderful part in part 3. His essay on surrealism is really, really nice. I found myself enjoying that one a lot. This big essay on Karl Kraus is really interesting. Kraus is a writer who I think is mostly, he's not discussed, or I don't know how much his stuff is even in print anymore, but he used to be kind of a big deal as a playwright and another critical, cultural critic, I should say. And so this essay does a lot to make Kraus seem interesting even for today's readers. I found a lot of the second half of this book a little more challenging. But the first part of Berlin Chronicle and One Way Street are two of the greatest bits of writing I've ever read. For me, they're right up my alley. They're exactly what I love. And that alone makes Reflections one of the best books I've read this year. And I'm happy to have continued reading Benjamin, and I will continue to do so going forward. Ultimately, the goal being to read the Arcades project, which, it'll be a challenge, but I'm looking forward to it. And I just think Benjamin's mind is so interesting, and he's consistently inconsistent, he sort of changes with the weather, and I'm not so interested in him. Like, I'm not interested in following any sort of philosophical groundwork that he lays out. I'm really more interested in him as a writer and as a thinker, and just as a really idiosyncratic critic of culture and of literature. You know, I just think he's great. I love Walter Benjamin. So that's all I have for May and June. I hope to read a little bit more to my standards in the coming months, but I'm not gonna be too hard on myself about it. But I do hope I can make videos more consistently throughout the summer and the rest of the year. So if you're watching, thank you so much, and I will speak to you again soon.